First off, for everyone who giggled at arousal state, I'm going to have to explain what that is. In the context of psychology, arousal is the state of being physiologically alert, awake, and attentive. Arousal is primarily controlled by the reticular activating system, RAS, in the brain. The RAS and your arousal level are influenced by a number of different things, such as emotions, the food you eat, and the neurotransmitters in the brain. Obviously, video games don't control what you eat, so we'll only be discussing the other factors. And some of you are probably still giggling at arousal state. To hopefully alleviate that, I'm going to repeat arousal state 5 times in order to affect your arousal state. Arousal state. Arousal state. Arousal state. I first encountered controlling, maintaining, and self-examining arousal states when I was an athlete. We spent a lot of time learning to better gauge our arousal state and achieve ideal arousal state for peak performance in races. If you're still giggling, I'm sorry, the term is what it is. I hoped by doing repetition I would affect your arousal state, but as you can perhaps feel, not everyone's going to have the intended effect. We each are affected in different ways by different factors. As such, to avoid the giggling, we're going to call arousal states hype states for the rest of the video, hopefully to cause laughter in a different way. You have likely heard of the concept flow state. Generally in game design, we graph flow state as a function of difficulty and skill, due to those variables being the primary influences on hype state when designing video games. I will do a longer piece about how difficulty is an accessibility issue later, but as I hope this graph will show you, players of different skill level will need different levels of difficulty in order to have the designer's intended experience. When people talk about being completely immersed in a game, it's because they are in a flow state, where they have absolute focus and engagement in their current activity due to where their hype state is at. Understanding hype states was extremely helpful to me as an athlete, but there's another field where hype states and its manipulation is fascinating to me. Game design. There is a particular video game that I want to examine this topic through, because increasing hype state is what it's most famous for. The original Doom was the second most downloaded software in computers in 1995. The only software downloaded more? Windows 95. The most popular operating system at the time. It was then followed by a direct sequel, Doom 2, also extremely successful. These two games were hyper-fast run-and-gun games that defined early FPS, to the point of the genre even being called Doom clones at the time. In the general view of culture at large, Doom is rage, brutal action, metal music, and blood. The original games have endured for so long because they are still fun. Sprite work didn't age poorly in the way early 3D games did, but the level design and other aspects are dated and of their time. And then there was no Doom content for 2 decades. Okay, jokes aside, Doom 3 is a bit of a mess, but I would say is an okay horror FPS. It's just a terrible Doom game. Doom 3 lacks most of the core aspects of the original Doom, because Doom is a feeling, one that 3 didn't try to achieve. The studio then tried and failed to develop a new Doom for years. At one point, it was a drab, brown environment Call of Duty circa late aughts shooter. The Doom Wiki has a collected history of the rocky development if you want to read about it, link below. At some point, around 2013, they scrapped the previous attempts completely and decided to restart development of a new Doom, one that would go back to the series' roots, to rage, brutal action, metal music, and blood. The result? Doom 2016. A sort of sequel, sort of reboot that rehashes many of the elements of the original Doom through a new and modern lens. One focused on capturing the feeling of Doom, even being influenced by community mods of the original game. It was met with rave reviews and some minor critiques about pacing and engagement during the late game. It was followed by Doom Eternal, a direct sequel to Doom that rehashes elements from Doom 2 and Doom 64. A side game released on the N64 that was re-released alongside of Eternal. Both Doom and Eternal looked back for inspiration, but did something distinctly new with that inspiration. And so, with all of that out of the way, Let's journey into the first circle of hell. When I was an athlete, I primarily influenced my hype state with music and meditation. There's a point of focus that's both relaxed, almost calm, but not lacking anticipation and anxiety, where you have absolute focus and are completely in the moment. The above-mentioned flow state. Controlling hype state to reach flow state during a race often involved prepping beforehand by either calming down if I was too anxious and too anticipatory, or getting my anticipation and energy up. Often the hours leading up to a race were just as important as the race itself. One of my primary methods of doing this was music. I had specific playlists for both, and certain genres were better for each need. In the case of getting hyped up, various electronic subgenres, and metal and heavier rock. Music is used in a variety of mediums to increase an audience's hype state. For an example from film,
yeah! Kick his ass!
Tell me you hear that, you don't want to climb a mountain and kill God.
there are a couple of obvious reasons why metal would increase our hype state more so than other genres. The higher BPM, more discordant sounds, and
Harsh vocals
make us reflect emotions that are connected to higher hype states. Mick Gordon knew this when creating the soundtrack to Doom and Eternal, purposefully creating a dubstep metal concept album that can be dynamically altered to match gameplay.
That original E1M1 riff is iconic. It is Doom. I wanted to find a way to kind of make that bigger and bolder.
The game raises your excitement level using its music. It increases in intensity as you get into fights, until it eventually crescendos and then ebbs and flows with combat, giving you variation within a single encounter. Music is one of the primary methods that Eternal and Doom tell you that combat is beginning or nearby, and in so doing also brings your hype state up in order to prepare for the flow state required for Doom's combat. It also helps bring the hype state back down to a more neutral state when combat ends. The BPM lowering, the instruments become less discordant and more meandering. It never fully rests, but instead feels like a short breath between moments of action that could happen at any time. Not everyone agrees that hype state can be manipulated by colors, but for the purpose of this section, we're going to be discussing color theory and its impact on people's emotions. Color theory is the science and art of how human beings perceive color and the effect of color on people. Doom's primary color palette is dominated by reds, the color most closely associated with anger, aggression, anxiety, and high hype emotions. It's also the color of
blood.
Doom complements this with blacks, whites, grays, browns, and oranges, rounding out the environmental colors with more neutral tone. The games employ very specific, select uses of greens, purples, and blues for elements that need to stand out against the majority red environment. Doom's enemies are also red, their contrast shown using saturation, the strength of the color, rather than the pigment. The color messaging is then reinforced with motion. Doom and Eternal both motivate player state by making them feel powerful through aggressive animation of their avatar within the game world. You have an inherent emotional conduit in the character, and so his expression of brutal power motivates an emotional response in the player, a feeling best described as,
"Oh, yes,"
that aids in creating Doom and Eternal's high-energy hype state. After all, the game wants you to feel like you can climb a mountain
and kill God.
Doom's combat will wear your health down, and in higher difficulties, which much of the game feels balanced around my very subjective opinion, you can die very quickly. The sense of constant danger helps to maintain the heightened energy state. In a way, it's inducing a slight amount of anxiety to get that anticipatory energy going. To reinforce this further, Doom 2016 actually treats the last section of your health bar as longer than you see it as, motivating the player to act in a more desperate manner. And because it's Doom, when you're in danger, you have to start. You have to press the attack if you want to survive in both Doom and Eternal. In both games, the most consistent method of staying alive is to finish or move injured enemies to spawn health pickups. You also need to attack to get more ammo by using the chainsaw. Eternal expanded this further by making the primary ammo and armor drops be in the hands of you attacking and damaging enemies, giving you the control over causing those drops, by making the chainsaw regenerate 1 ammo when empty, and a repeatable flamethrower which sets enemies on fire, allowing armor to drop by damaging the burning enemy, extra dropping if you kill that enemy. These resource pinata powers can be combined, allowing you to create armor when chainsawing, guaranteeing a kill on a full health enemy and giving ammo, or use with a finisher for an armor and health top-up. This means that once you are in that combat space, it's best to keep going, keep fighting, and aggressively engage the enemies, which works really well with the visuals and audio to create the desired hype state. The new Doom games also have a variety of increasing difficulty settings and optional bonus higher difficulty combat areas. The designers knew that inducing the correct hype state requires matching the difficulty to the skill of the player, and with the different modes you can find that sweet spot for you as an individual. The designers set up that difficulty to be adjustable in this way because they want the player to have a specific experience of flow state. Because Doom is as much of a game as it is a feeling. I would argue Doom and Eternal are unique games because they're not built around telling a story plot-wise, but instead galvanize a very specific, rage-driven flow state that makes you emotionally experience
The Doom Slayers.
incredible rage and power personally. An emotional journey instead of a plot-based tale. Doom 2016 sees plot more as an afterthought. It's there, but the Doom Slayer doesn't care because he exists
To
Rip and tear until it is done.
and by extension, that is your purpose as well. Eternal has a story, but it mostly exists as an attempt to help with what the next section discusses. Doom is a feeling, an emotional state, and the developers crafted around you, and everything that is not part of it directly exists to support it in some way. However, the extremely high level of constant putting the pedal to the metal 100 out of 100 energy state is exhausting. Doom and Eternal are phenomenal at getting you to a high hype state, but not so great at juxtaposing it by de-escalating and then re-escalating back up to it. Doom tries to handle this by having lots of quieter exploration. This exploration is somewhat limited in being able to bring down your anticipation and completely optional. If a player wants, they can just keep pressing forward. Eternal tried to solve this by expanding the story significantly, giving a hub space between most levels and adding more platforming sections. However, Eternal's combat is even more intense and pulse-pounding than the first games, and it never quite gets enough of that adrenaline to leave the system before it starts to get it going again. While this makes it poor for lengthy play sessions, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. The game almost feels like it was intended to be played in at most film-length chunks of time that maximize a very specific emotion phenomenally. So while I do get tired, and have to stop playing after going for long enough, I think that exhaustion is worth it for what the experience is trying to be. I actually think that the exhaustion is part of its message. Rage is a consumptive force, an emotion that will tire you, wear you down, and exhaust you. It will pull you apart. And Doom Guy is not really a person, he's more of an allegory, an embodiment of the feeling that is doom. The game even says it.
That he is, for lack of a better word, a god, an avenging angel, the right hand of doom, here to save humanity from its sins. Maybe he represents humankind's rage, their will to persevere, to overcome that which would threaten our survival.
Or more simply, Doomslayer is anger at injustice embodied, and to connect yourself to that is both powerful and draining, because rage is a consumptive force. In the course of writing this video, I learned something new about metal. A study from the University of Queensland's School of Psychology found that extreme music generally led to being calmer after listening to it. Media that lets us explore emotions that are generally seen as negative allows us to process and release those emotions in a more healthy way. When I was no longer able to work out due to my chronic illness, I lost my release valve for several emotions. Certain games and types of games really let me explore those emotions and let go of them. When I got let go due to COVID earlier this year, I was understandably pretty angry at losing my job. That's when I started playing Doom Eternal, and it really helped me get that anger out in a positive way and then move on from it. I think that's something we can easily overlook as marginalized people. It's easy to let anger at our situation and at how people treat us consume our energy even when no one is around. And we are right to be angry, but we also deserve to take care of ourselves. Doom is a power fantasy that tells us if we are angry enough, we can shake the very bedrock of the world. But I think it also shows us that we need to take breaks to recenter. If you get one thing from this video, it's that you need to regulate your emotional state so that you can be angry when it's needed, but that you aren't burnt out before then. Because sometimes we need to feel like we can climb a mountain
And kill God.
to be able to feel calm again afterwards.
More wood for their fires, loud neighbors. Flashlight reveries caught in a headlight of a truck. Eating seeds is a pastime activity.
The toxicity of our city, of our city. Now, what do you own the world? How do you own this art? Art is